The strong girl you're looking at is named Tomo. She bravely confessed her feelings to a boy named Kubota. However, Kubota didn't truly realize Tomo's feelings. Kubota only saw her as his close friend. This made Tomo feel disappointed. The two of them live next door to each other. So Tomo has been hanging out with Kubota since they were little. When they started going to school, Tomo was shocked to find out that Kubota thought she was a boy. Because of that, unnecessary clashes sometimes happened between them. In class, Tomo got angry when Kubota misunderstood her as a boy. So she needed help from a classmate. This classmate's name is Misuzu. Misuzu thought the problem actually came from Tomo. Because ever since she was little, Tomo only played games meant for boys. Tomo even used to get into fights with other kids. That's why Tomo might have been influenced in some way. At that point, Misuzu came up with a solution for Tomo. First, she needed to be careful with the way she spoke. However, Tomo realized it was hard for her to talk naturally like a girl. A little while later, Tomo ran into Kubota during break time. But because Tomo's personality was too strong, she didn't back down in front of Kubota's rudeness. So the two of them ended up arguing and fighting fiercely. When she got home, Tomo's father, named Aizawa, was furious that Tomo had gotten into a fight at school. The next morning, Kubota quickly apologized to Tomo for the way he acted the day before. However, Tomo was still angry. Tomo didn't pay any attention to Kubota, which made him unhappy. Eventually, thanks to Kubota's persistence, the two of them made up. On the rooftop, Misuzu couldn't understand why She always had lunch with Tomo. Even though Tomo felt more comfortable around Kubota, so Misuzu quickly invited Kubota to join them, and the three of them started eating lunch together. However, Misuzu and Kubota always clashed. In the classroom, Misuzu overheard something about Kubota. He was talking badly about Tomo to some other boys, which made Tomo furious. So she decided to teach Kubota a lesson. Outside, Misuzu had a private conversation with Tanabe. Misuzu warned Tanabe not to be a bad influence on her friend, because she had known them for a very long time. When the whole school was heading home, it suddenly started pouring rain. Misuzu and Kubota were both waiting for someone to bring them an umbrella. The atmosphere between them was a bit tense. Misuzu was curious why Kubota disliked her so much, even though they used to play together for a long time in the past. It turned out that Kubota didn't like Misuzu, because when they got into trouble as kids, Kubota and Tomo were scolded by the adults. But Misuzu was never around. Even Misuzu hadn't realized that before. Suddenly, she wondered why Kubota didn't join any clubs. It turned out he spent most of his time practicing martial arts at Tomo's house. Because Kubota felt happy when he was with her. Suddenly, Misuzu thought, what would happen if Tomo got a boyfriend if Tomo became close with another guy? And Kubota didn't even know about it. Suddenly, Kubota pushed Misuzu out of the way. Right at that moment, Tomo appeared. She had no idea what had just happened between them. At that moment, Kubota offered to walk home with Tomo. Tomo was flustered and looked to Misuzu for her opinion. But in the end, Tomo went home with Kubota. On the way home, suddenly, Kubota complimented Tomo on her gentle scent. That made her blush in embarrassment. So Tomo quickly ran off, leaving Kubota behind. However, Kubota caught up with Tomo. He handed her the umbrella and ran away, leaving her confused about what had just happened. On another day at the martial arts club, Tomo's opponent this time was Masaki. Unexpectedly, Tomo was actually Masaki's ideal type. At that moment, Masaki became distracted, because he kept staring at Tomo's beauty. He was surprised by her strength. Then he began to wonder if Tomo had already gotten used to the club, since she was the only girl there. But with Tomo's skills, she was a perfect fit for this place. In fact, Tomo was undefeated even among the boys. However, that made Tomo feel insecure, because she didn't believe she was truly a girl. Suddenly, Masaki immediately disagreed, because he thought Tomo was very attractive in his eyes. At that moment, Tomo was extremely excited, so she directly asked Masaki about what made her attractive. Masaki became flustered. He gently explained to Tomo that she didn't need to focus on just one thing. Tomo had her own kind of charm. So Masaki believed Tomo could be confident in who she was. At school, because Masaki was popular and well-liked, When Tomo got close to him, it made the other girls jealous. When she got to class, Kubota heard rumors that Tomo had made a new friend at the club. So he became curious about who it was. Tomo didn't hesitate to show Kubota a photo. Unexpectedly, Kubota thought Masaki was a girl, because Masaki had a feminine appearance. A little while later, Tomo was drinking water in the hallway. Suddenly, two girls showed up. They wanted to talk to Tomo in private. Tomo already knew they didn't have good intentions, so she showed off her strength, which scared them. That afternoon, when Tomo met the two of them again, it turned out those two girls liked Masaki. So when they saw Tomo getting close to Masaki, it made them jealous. That's when Tomo understood the situation. She eagerly offered to help them get closer to Masaki. In the end, the misunderstanding between everyone was resolved. The next morning on the way to school, Tomo felt helpless, because Kubota truly didn't see her as a girl. She was the only one trying to avoid him. The bus started getting more and more crowded. Suddenly, a pervert touched Tomo inappropriately. Strangely, she didn't do anything, because Tomo didn't want Kubota to find out. But unexpectedly, Kubota realized everything, and he reported the pervert. It was the first time Tomo saw Kubota act like that. She felt like she was being treated as a girl. A little while later at school, after Misuzu heard the news, she immediately became worried about Tomo. But then she breathed a sigh of relief, because she found out Kubota had taken care of everything. At that moment, Tomo recalled, just when she thought Kubota saw her as a girl, he unexpectedly told her not to wear skirts, because it really didn't suit her, which made Tomo angry. Back at home, Misuzu thought maybe Kubota wasn't wrong, because he was worried Tomo might run into that pervert again. The reason was that Tomo's skirt was too short, but Tomo's simple reason was that wearing it made it easier for her to move around. After Misuzu tried explaining about the skirt, Tomo was surprised by many things she had never known before. When school ended, Misuzu told Kubota that Tomo was waiting for him so they could go home together. That made Kubota excited, because he thought Tomo had forgiven him. However, when Kubota met Tomo, he was shocked and speechless, because of Tomo's current skirt. On the way home, Tomo suddenly apologized to Kubota for the fight. But today, Kubota was acting completely different from usual, which made Tomo feel like something was off. At that moment, Kubota apologized to her, even though they were close friends. Kubota believed he had no right to tell someone how to dress. Tomo noticed the flustered look on Kubota's face. The next day, Misuzu asked Tomo how she felt about the short skirt. Tomo answered honestly, it was a disaster, and she would never wear something like that again. In class, Misuzu teased Kubota, because he was now always avoiding Tomo. Eventually, Kubota finally gathered the courage to act normal around Tomo again. The next day, a cute girl named Carol showed up. Carol was often surrounded by a group of boys. Tomo thought it was because Carol was the most feminine, which made Tomo long to be like that too. Misuzu knew that Carol wasn't just famous for her looks. She was also the only international student, so Carol had a certain elegant aura. Even her delicate presence made the boys instinctively want to protect her. That's when Tomo made a plan to become friends with Carol, because she could learn a lot from her. Just then, Tomo saw Masaki and Carol walking together. It turned out the two of them were actually relatives. Tomo was shocked to learn so many new things. At that moment, she took the initiative to befriend Carol. Unexpectedly, Carol thought Tomo was a boy, which left Tomo feeling helpless. Fortunately, Masaki stepped in to explain, so their relationship remained normal. Then Carol playfully poked Tomo's cheek, and she kept calling Tomo a dummy, which confused Tomo. She had no idea what was going on. A little while later, Carol wanted Misuzu to ask Tomo a few questions. However, Misuzu quickly made it clear she had no interest in someone like Carol, so Misuzu bluntly refused to get involved. But she did suggest that it would be better for Carol to talk to Kubota, so Carol immediately went to meet him. Unexpectedly, Carol said she wanted to defeat someone, and she was directed to Kubota. Although Kubota wasn't thrilled about it, he had plenty of free time, so he agreed to help Carol become stronger. After school, Kubota arranged to meet Carol alone in front of Tomo, which left Tomo confused and surprised. Tomo didn't understand Kubota's recent behavior. Even Misuzu had no idea either. At the martial arts club, Tomo couldn't focus, because she kept thinking about Kubota. She was curious about what they were doing. Meanwhile, in Kubota's group, he was diligently training Carol. Just then, Tomo showed up. She got angry because of how close they looked. Suddenly, Carol told Tomo she wouldn't be her enemy anymore. Then Carol left. The two people left behind didn't understand why, which left them confused. At that moment, Misuzu got into a car with Carol. The two of them ate cake together. Carol's goal was to become friends with Misuzu, because she didn't have many friends. However, Misuzu suggested, if Carol wanted friends, she should talk to Tomo, because Tomo would definitely be her friend. That's why, at school, Carol nervously asked to be friends with Tomo. Because in the past, Carol had been rejected many times before. But this time, Tomo agreed right away. That made Carol really happy. Even Tomo and Kubota were surprised by how friendly Carol was. Suddenly, Kubota revealed he and Misuzu had dated back in middle school. That made Tomo feel disappointed, because they were all close friends. Yet no one told her about it. A little while later, Tomo angrily questioned Misuzu about their middle school relationship. It turned out they both wanted to forget it ever happened, because Misuzu had only dated Kubota for 3 days. At that moment, Misuzu told the story. It was during the final spring of middle school. Kubota suddenly confessed his feelings to Misuzu. Even though back then, Kubota was really popular. On their first date, they rode bicycles a long distance just to enjoy the view. But because Misuzu didn't have much stamina, she was planning to break up with him. Unexpectedly, Kubota was the one who brought up breaking up. He said he didn't think they were compatible. That left Misuzu completely frozen. It became one of her darkest memories. And it was something she had always wanted to bury. Right now, Misuzu always hates Kubota. On the way home, Tomo always asks Kubota about Misuzu. But currently, Kubota no longer has anything to do with Misuzu. However, Tomo is still frustrated, because she's the only one who doesn't know about this. So Kubota sincerely apologized to her. The next day at school, Masaki appeared behind them. At that moment, Kubota realized Masaki was a boy. So he felt a little jealous. Because of that, Kubota acted rudely toward Masaki, which made Tomo angry. However, Kubota learned that Masaki practiced martial arts. So Kubota threatened that he would crush Masaki with his own strength. By chance, Kubota found out that for some reason, Tomo had joined the boys' club. After school, Kubota was disappointed because he couldn't go home with Tomo, since she had plans to hang out with Misuzu and Carol. Coincidentally, Masaki and Kubota met at the bus stop. Deep inside, Masaki was extremely nervous when he found himself in this situation. On the bus, Masaki was curious why Kubota didn't join the martial arts club. It turned out Kubota didn't want to lose to Tomo, even though he didn't want to hurt her. Because she's a girl, every time Tomo fought, she was always serious and had solid skills. Kubota could win in a match, only because he's a guy. But in sports, there are always rules. Kubota was just a challenger. At that moment, Masaki realized Kubota respected Tomo just like he did. The next day at the club, Tomo found out that yesterday Masaki had taken the same bus as Kubota. Masaki told her that they had a pleasant conversation on the bus. Tomo was immediately happy about that, because Kubota had trouble making friends. Even though she had introduced him to many people, they were always intimidated by Kubota's scary appearance. As for Tomo's group, Misuzu was now curious about Kubota and Tomo's relationship. Tomo revealed that she and Kubota hadn't been hanging out as much lately. After they entered high school, it made Tomo feel unhappy. Misuzu advised her to take the initiative with Kubota, which made Tomo feel embarrassed. In class, this time, Tomo bravely invited Kubota to hang out during the next break, which made Kubota really happy, because he had been waiting for this for a long time. After that, Misuzu's group planned to take Tomo shopping, because she only had boys' clothes. When they arrived, Tomo was overwhelmed by the variety of outfits. Misuzu thought carefully about choosing clothes that suited Tomo. In the end, they found an outfit she liked. On the day of the meet-up, they went together to familiar places. However, Tomo was worried that things wouldn't go as she planned. Even so, the two of them had a wonderful time, which made Kubota incredibly happy. At that moment, he felt something very different about Tomo. The next day, Tanabe shared with Kubota that he wanted to see Misuzu smile. Even though Tanabe had tried very hard, Misuzu was extremely cold toward him. Unexpectedly, Kubota revealed, Misuzu often smiled at him. But in reality, both of them misunderstood Misuzu's smile. Because she was a very distant person, Misuzu always kept a certain distance from those around her. At that moment, Tanabe met Misuzu directly. He asked her how he could make her smile. However, Misuzu immediately rejected him. She advised that if Tanabe liked her, then he should seriously come up with a plan to approach her, which made him admire Misuzu even more. As for Tomo, when she saw the affectionate gestures between other girls, Tomo also wanted to interact with friends like that. However, Tomo's strange behavior made the girls around her keep their distance. At that point, Tomo wanted to try that kind of closeness with Misuzu. But Misuzu immediately refused. The most suitable person was Carol. Even Tomo was jealous of how feminine she was, which brought the two of them closer as friends. The next day, Tomo was upset because she thought Misuzu was angry with her. However, Carol didn't notice any difference in Misuzu. After Tomo explained for a while, Carol finally understood the situation. She ran to apologize to Misuzu, because Carol had troubled Tomo. After Misuzu realized Carol's sincerity, she went to the school rooftop. At that moment, Misuzu apologized to Tomo for making her upset. Because of some personal issues, she had taken her frustration out on Tomo. However, Tomo wanted to know everything clearly. It turned out that the physical gestures Tomo mentioned yesterday, Misuzu also wanted to experience them. But she didn't have the courage to say so. In the end, Tomo finally understood the reason. So the two of them made up. After school, Tomo came up behind Kubota. She suddenly stepped closer and hugged him. However, Kubota pulled away from Tomo. He thought Tomo shouldn't do that, since they were at school, which made Tomo furious, because Kubota always acted like that with her. At that moment, Kubota said, only he was allowed to do that kind of thing. So Tomo didn't hesitate to punch Kubota hard. The next morning, Tomo tried her best to wake up. But the one who woke her up was Kubota, which made Tomo confused, because she didn't know what Kubota had been doing in her room. However, he didn't understand why Tomo was so angry. At that moment, Kubota got curious about Tomo's father. It turned out he handled everything at the dojo. Aizawa even lived and slept there. At that moment, Tomo's mother became furious, because Akemi couldn't understand why Aizawa still felt shy around her. When Akemi brought them to the dojo, Aizawa fainted when he saw her. As for Tomo, she thought that was a sign of weakness. But Kubota immediately disagreed, because when a man is deeply in love with a woman, that can never be considered weakness. No matter what happens, he will always protect the girl he loves. At that moment, Tomo shared that ever since school days, every time her mother got into trouble, Aizawa was the first one to take her side. At school, today Misuzu created an opportunity for Tomo and Kubota to have lunch together. However, people around them were gossiping about it. Even so, Kubota still felt comfortable having lunch with Tomo. At that moment, Masaki appeared on the rooftop in front of Carol and Misuzu. After learning that Misuzu was friends with Carol, Masaki sincerely thanked Misuzu for taking good care of Carol. As for Masaki, although Carol often acted strangely, she was very kind-hearted, and Carol was very important to Masaki. Since they had been together since childhood, Masaki had always seen Carol as his precious little sister. After lunch ended, Tomo was extremely embarrassed about earlier with Kubota. Suddenly, Agawa came asking Tomo for help. A strange man had approached Agawa at a cafe. It turned out he was a senior at school. He was known for being a bad guy. That man had bad intentions toward Agawa. After a while, Tomo's group showed up. Tomo quickly handled that senior. After being defeated by Tomo, the senior planned an attack with his gang. They were going to ambush Tomo. Luckily, Kubota was there, and he dealt with each of them one by one, making them terrified, and they came to Tomo to sincerely apologize. Today was the day Tomo and Misuzu visited Carol's house. At that moment, they met Carol's mother at the gate. Her name was Ferris. After she found out they were Carol's friends, Ferris quickly invited them into the house. Tomo was surprised by Carol's room. Then Carol showed Tomo some childhood photos. Ever since she was little, Carol's mother always dressed her in cute and soft clothes. And most importantly, no one was allowed to get close to Carol. At that moment, the three of them played happily together in the room. After a while, Tomo and Misuzu finally went home. The next day at school, Tomo was shocked to learn there would be a test tomorrow. She had completely forgotten about the exam. Then Misuzu suggested to Tomo that she could come over to study at her house. Carol would be joining too. At that moment, Kubota appeared. He was concerned about Tomo. Suddenly, Kubota invited her to study together. However, Misuzu overheard it. She immediately advised Kubota not to act smug because of his class ranking. Because Misuzu was ranked number 1 in the class. That made Kubota frustrated and speechless. After school, the three of them went to Misuzu's house together. Tomo felt a bit out of place, because it had been a long time since she last came here. Back in the day, Misuzu told Tomo that she wasn't allowed to visit Misuzu's house. It turned out Tomo had wrecked everything in Misuzu's house. Because young Tomo was a hyperactive girl who couldn't sit still, which drove Misuzu absolutely crazy. Right then, Misuzu's mother came home. She was surprised to see that Misuzu had friends over. Back to studying, Tomo didn't understand any of the small exercises. But surprisingly, Carol was able to solve them instantly. However, Misuzu didn't approve of Carol's approach. Because Carol couldn't explain the solving steps clearly. That would waste her time during the real test. Since Carol couldn't explain the steps, Misuzu patiently taught them both. Unexpectedly, Misuzu's explanations were very effective. Tomo hoped that she could go to the same university as Misuzu. Tomo sincerely confessed that in the past, she had worked really hard just to get into the same high school as Misuzu. Tomo felt she was truly lucky to have Misuzu as her best friend. That made Misuzu gradually come to understand many things. When the test results came out, Tomo was overjoyed with her performance this time, and everyone was happy with the results they had earned. A while later, Kubota proudly showed Tomo that his family had just bought a new video game. At that moment, Tomo recalled their childhood. When she first met Kubota, he was just a game-obsessed kid. However, over time, Kubota no longer liked being called that. Kubota then invited Tomo over to his house, so the two of them could play video games all night. That made Tomo really excited. But after a while, Tomo started to regret it, because it meant she would have to sleep over at Kubota's house. However, backing out now didn't seem like a good idea. Carol and Misuzu had tried to plan things together, but it looked like their plan didn't work out. At home, Tomo asked her parents for their opinion, but they honestly didn't care at all. This made Tomo extremely worried. She finally arrived at Kubota's house. Tomo was surprised by Kubota's cooking skills. After a while, Kubota grew curious about the bath. Since Tomo usually showers in the evening, she decided to bathe at Kubota's place today. This time, Kubota had come up with a plan. After Tomo finished eating, she would go take a shower. Then they would play games together until bedtime. Finally, Tomo stepped out of the bathroom. At that moment, things became awkward between them. Tomo thought Kubota might actually be interested in her. After that, the two of them got immersed in the game. They shared some joyful moments together. Eventually, the two of them fell asleep. While Kubota was sound asleep, Tomo secretly looked at his face. Suddenly, Kubota unintentionally hugged Tomo. It startled her. The next morning, Kubota woke up, but he was surprised, because Tomo had slept on the same futon. However, Kubota didn't know what to do, so he pretended that nothing had happened. Unfortunately, after Tomo went home, she recalled what had happened that morning when she woke up. She had been lying on Kubota's mattress. This realization made her panic. A few days later, Kubota thoughtfully gave Tomo a pair of glasses as a birthday gift for her. Tomo was delighted, so she wore them to school, despite the curious looks from everyone. A little while later, Misuzu also gave Tomo a present. However, this time it was a book, which made Tomo feel a bit disappointed. Just then, Carol brought Tomo a gold bar, which surprised her. At this point, they planned to meet at Misuzu's house on Saturday. Misuzu's group had come up with a plan to turn Tomo into the most feminine girl possible. Misuzu began by putting makeup on Tomo. However, she needed Carol's help. In the end, Tomo had a perfect appearance. Next, she had to learn how to speak properly. But that seemed to be a challenge for Tomo. At this point, Carol and Misuzu made a plan so Tomo could go out with this new look. So they asked her to go buy some ice cream. That way, the two of them successfully got Tomo to go out dressed like that. At the convenience store, Tomo felt shy in front of the group of boys. She thought they were staring at her strangely. Just then, Kubota also showed up. Surprisingly, he didn't recognize Tomo, so she quickly bought her things and tried to escape. Unfortunately, as Tomo exited the convenience store, she tripped because of the shoes she was wearing. At that moment, Kubota came closer to check on her. He thought this girl looked a lot like Tomo. But Tomo would never dress like this. Kubota quickly helped Tomo stand up. However, she was surprised by Kubota's gentle gesture. Suddenly, Tomo suggested they walk together. But Tomo immediately regretted it, because she had no idea what she was thinking. As for Kubota, he now confirmed to himself that the girl next to him definitely wasn't Tomo. There were just too many differences. At that moment, the two of them sat on a grassy hill to rest. Suddenly, Kubota opened up. He said he had a close female friend. But recently, things were no longer the same. However, Kubota's current goal was to defeat that close female friend. This time, Tomo was hesitant. She wondered if she should tell Kubota the truth now. Suddenly, Tomo remembered she was supposed to buy ice cream. So she immediately ran back home. She happily enjoyed birthday cake with everyone. At school, while everyone was playing dodgeball, Tomo made the other girls run away. Because of her strength. So this time, Tomo would join the boys' team in the next tournament, which left her confused in the middle of everyone. The day of the tournament finally arrived. Tomo and Kubota performed very well, making the opposing teams nervous. However, in the final round, they would face the strongest student in school. His name was Takeshi. Even so, the two of them had prepared for this. The final match began. Tanabe was the first victim of Takeshi, but he fought without any sportsmanship. So Tomo lost control. She quickly charged toward Takeshi. Unfortunately, Tomo failed, because Takeshi's strength was overwhelming. Taking advantage of the moment, Takeshi suddenly focused all his power on Tomo, which left her flustered. Suddenly, Kubota stepped in and blocked the ball with his body, making Tomo worried about him. In the end, Tomo's anger exploded to its peak, causing Takeshi to lose focus. Tomo's team successfully won the match. After the game, Takeshi secretly asked Kubota to meet. The two of them challenged each other in martial arts. However, Takeshi lost unexpectedly, because of his overconfidence. On the way home, Takeshi thought it would be a waste of talent if Kubota didn't join his club. But Kubota refused, because for him, he only wanted to chase the shadow ahead of him. In Kubota's story, he wanted to be like Tomo, because of her extraordinary abilities. When Kubota trained, Kubota just wanted to catch up to the shadow ahead of him. At that moment, he remembered a time 10 years ago. The day he moved back from Tokyo. That was the first time Kubota met Tomo. Back then, Tomo accidentally broke his gaming console. After that, she felt guilty. So Tomo sincerely apologized to Kubota. Since they were the same age and lived next door, Tomo then asked to be friends with Kubota. From that day on, the two of them played together almost all day. The next day, Tomo brought Misuzu to come play with them. However, that's when conflict began between Misuzu and Kubota. But the friendship between Kubota and Tomo only grew stronger. Eventually, Kubota managed to keep up with Tomo's wild antics. That's why, whenever he was with Tomo, Kubota felt himself growing stronger. But it was all a misunderstanding, because Kubota had been bullied by some bad kids. Fortunately, thanks to Tomo, she got his gaming console back from those bullies. But Kubota didn't understand why Tomo would do something like that. However, the reason was simple. When Kubota was in trouble, Tomo would always be ready to help, because they were friends. At that moment, Kubota lent Tomo his gaming console, and she could borrow it until Kubota became stronger than Tomo. So Kubota was determined to train hard. But 10 years had passed, and he still hadn't taken the console back, even though Tomo knew Kubota had already become much stronger than her. On the last day of summer break, Misuzu and Carol stayed over at Tomo's house for the night. They played a fun game, and Tomo had to follow Misuzu's orders. Her expression at that moment was extremely dangerous. The order was, Tomo would go watch the fireworks alone with Kubota. So Tomo went over to Kubota's house. She invited him to go see the fireworks with her, but it would be just the two of them. Kubota immediately agreed, but Tomo wondered why he wasn't excited like he usually was before. However, at home, Kubota was actually overjoyed, but he hid his emotions in front of Tomo. As for Tomo, she had a feeling that Kubota's behavior had been a little strange lately. At that moment, everyone had fallen asleep. The day of the fireworks festival had arrived. Kubota felt both excited and happy, but he also felt a little sad. Kubota decided he wanted to understand this unpleasant feeling. When he arrived, he was surprised by Tomo's appearance. Tomo was wearing a traditional outfit. With a gentle look, she radiated a dazzling aura. The two of them joined in the festival's activities together. Everyone at the festival was shocked by Tomo's beauty, because in the past, she was a wild troublemaker at festivals. Today, Misuzu and Carol also attended the festival. Even Masaki came along with them. His job was to take care of Carol. As for Tomo, she encountered two suspicious strangers. They tried to mess with her. Luckily, Kubota showed up and kept Tomo safe. A little while later, Tomo gently thanked him, but Kubota kept rejecting her words of thanks, which made her angry. Tomo just wanted to sincerely thank Kubota at least once. Faced with Tomo's words, suddenly, Kubota grabbed her hand, but he continued to be confused. So the two of them went to watch the fireworks. However, in that moment, Tomo planned to confess her feelings to Kubota, but she hesitated. Tomo was afraid that if she said it, it might be the end for both of them. Tomo just wanted Kubota to be hers alone, so she thought now wasn't the right time. On the way home, Kubota still didn't understand what the feelings he had for Tomo actually were. But he realized one thing. He couldn't spar with Tomo like he used to anymore. When school started again, Tomo had a feeling Kubota was being more cautious around her. To Tomo, the way Kubota was treating her now was extremely frightening. Tomo felt sad if things continued this way. At that moment, Carol realized something about Tomo had changed. Misuzu was also observing everything happening around them. She didn't know whether the change between them was right or wrong. Misuzu felt irritated about everything that had happened, because they were all her close friends. At that moment, Tomo's enemies were furious with her. Suddenly, they spotted Misuzu, so they managed to get close to her. But the murderous look on Misuzu's face was enough to scare them off. Just then, Carol showed up. She quickly used a weapon to attack the leader. However, both of them ran away before things got worse. They were now hiding in an abandoned building near the school. Misuzu sensed that things were going south, so she called Kubota for help. At the same time, Tomo heard what happened, which immediately made her worried. But the two girls hadn't been hiding long before they were discovered by the thugs. Just in time, Tomo arrived with a fierce expression. She quickly dealt with those guys. Kubota also showed up to assist Tomo. But Tomo had already taken care of everything on her own. In the end, the thugs were left humiliated. Misuzu then attacked them with words, making them tremble with fear because of her terrifying threats. Suddenly, Kubota, who had been waiting outside for Misuzu, accidentally discovered her perfect plan, because Misuzu's ultimate goal was to protect her friends and herself. A few days later, Masaki suddenly showed up at Aizawa's dojo. He wanted to join the martial arts training. At that moment, Aizawa bluntly said, Masaki looked quite weak. However, behind that fragile appearance, Aizawa saw an evil spirit hiding within Masaki. After a while, the group began their training, but Masaki's body hadn't adjusted yet. Then Tomo made an announcement. Masaki would have to fight in a match. Unexpectedly, his opponent was Kubota, which made Masaki nervous. But Masaki wanted Kubota to go all out. If he could beat Kubota, then Tomo might pay a little more attention to him. This time, Kubota truly exploded with energy. His face looked like it was about to burst. The match between the two began. Masaki could feel Kubota's overwhelming power. Kubota's strength was too much to handle. Even though Masaki knew he couldn't win this time, so he just wanted to land at least one punch on Kubota. But unexpectedly, Kubota couldn't control his strength, which caused Masaki to pass out right after that. When he finally woke up, Tomo was sitting beside him, watching over him. At that moment, Masaki felt pathetic, but Tomo immediately denied it. She understood. Masaki wanted to become stronger because of Carol. To Masaki, Carol was a carefree and optimistic person. Since she was little, she had faced a lot of trouble. That's why Masaki always tried to become stronger for Carol. Tomo was touched by that kind of feeling. She comforted Masaki, saying he would succeed one day, because Tomo could see how determined he was. Days later, Masaki and Carol walked to school together. Masaki then revealed that he had joined Aizawa's dojo. But Carol's face turned gloomy. By chance, she found out the truth. Tomo was the one Masaki had always wanted to pursue. This time in class, Carol secretly asked Kubota to hang out after school. However, Misuzu noticed something was off. She became curious about Carol's intentions. At that moment, Carol boldly said, things wouldn't go the way Misuzu wanted. That surprised Misuzu. A little while later, Kubota and Carol were at the park together. But they were just sitting and watching other people have fun. Carol then revealed, she had just said some harsh words to Misuzu. And now, she was doing something bad to Tomo. Suddenly, Kubota interrupted her, even though he didn't know exactly what Carol had done. He knew Tomo wasn't the type to abandon her friends. Later, Carol showed up at Kubota's house. She told him, there was someone she liked. But the current situation wasn't looking good. And part of it was Kubota's fault. That left Kubota shocked. So Carol said she would have to torture him. Out of nowhere, she kissed him on the cheek, which scared Kubota so much that he pushed Carol onto the bed. In a panic, he ran straight to Tomo's place. Kubota suddenly stepped forward and hugged her, which left Tomo completely startled. Deep down, Kubota was still thinking. He hadn't fully seen Tomo as a girl yet, because both of them still hadn't fulfilled that promise. Carol suddenly appeared, which startled them. At that moment, Carol apologized to both of them and went home. The next day, Carol apologized to Misuzu again on the rooftop. In order not to ruin Misuzu's original plan, she decided to try connecting Carol with Masaki. A while later, Misuzu went to Masaki and asked clearly about his relationship with Carol. She directly asked about Masaki's feelings. At that moment, Masaki admitted he was in love with Carol. However, to Masaki, Carol was someone stronger than he was. Masaki was drawn to that strength. But when he seriously thought about the relationship, Masaki suddenly felt afraid, so he acted coldly in front of Carol. Many years had passed, but Masaki still hadn't dared to face Carol. At this point, Misuzu's plan would hurt Carol, so that Masaki could see it. He would unconsciously move closer to Carol, just as Misuzu had planned. At that moment, Carol was completely hurt, and she went home early. Misuzu informed Masaki, advising him to go to Carol's house immediately. At that moment, Masaki was already in Carol's room. She was crying non-stop in sadness. Immediately, Carol took out her anger on Masaki. So Masaki explained, what Misuzu had said at school was all a lie, because she wanted to make Carol feel weak. But Misuzu's true intention was to help Masaki, so that Masaki could bravely face his feelings for Carol. In the end, the two of them made up, and their relationship took a new step forward. Since childhood, Carol had always been happy, because Masaki was always by her side. Carol didn't know when or why, but she had always deeply loved him. At school, Carol finally managed to kiss Misuzu. The two of them teased Misuzu together. The atmosphere between them kept getting better. Days later, the school held a marathon race. This time, Tomo and Kubota were determined to win. The two of them faced off. On the racetrack, Tomo teased Kubota, because no matter how hard Kubota tried, Tomo would still leave him behind. At that point, everyone was already exhausted, but Tomo and Kubota still pushed on with determination. Suddenly, Tomo crossed over into the girls' lane, but in reality, she just wanted to compete with Kubota on an equal level. Even Masaki was surprised. At that moment, Kubota still believed that he couldn't catch up to Tomo. However, after a while, Tomo suddenly collapsed to the ground because she was sick. At that moment, Kubota made a decision. He would carry Tomo to the infirmary by himself. When Tomo woke up, Misuzu and Carol were already by her side. Taking care of her, Misuzu had prepared a plan for Tomo. This would be a chance for her to show her weakness in front of Kubota. Right then, Kubota appeared. Tomo thanked him for what he did. At that moment, Tomo took the opportunity. She asked for Kubota's help, so that she could get a ride home. The next day, Kubota came to visit Tomo at her house. At that moment, Tomo's health had already stabilized. Suddenly, she returned the handheld game console to Kubota, because Tomo felt that Kubota had become much stronger now. Flashing back to their middle school days. On the first day of school, Kubota was happy to be in the same class as Tomo. However, at that time, Kubota still thought Tomo was a boy, which made her feel disappointed. From Kubota's side, he was extremely embarrassed. There was a misunderstanding between the two of them, so they barely talked for a while. They only spoke when necessary. However, sometime later, Kubota wanted to make up with Tomo, but he didn't know how. So Kubota felt he needed another friend to help connect them. Right then, Misuzu showed up, so Kubota took the initiative to date her. Both of them knew they didn't like each other, but Kubota was curious why Misuzu agreed to date him. However, it was part of Misuzu's own plan, and she wouldn't reveal it. Back at home, Kubota never expected that he would have a girlfriend, and that person turned out to be Misuzu. From Misuzu's side, she knew this relationship had no future, but Misuzu did feel a little something. However, it ended almost immediately after. Their first date was a bike ride up the mountain. The next day was fishing, which left Misuzu feeling hopeless. Later on, Kubota asked to meet with Misuzu. Though it wasn't pleasant, he took the initiative to break up, causing Misuzu to deeply resent Kubota. After that, Kubota bravely started talking to Tomo again. On the way home, Tomo punched Kubota hard for not speaking to her all that time, which made Tomo cry from emotion. So Kubota shared what was truly in his heart. In the end, they made up. The two of them would remain best friends forever. But now everything had changed. So the best thing Kubota could do now was to face Tomo directly with strength. At that moment, Kubota suddenly realized he didn't know since when Tomo had become that adorable. After several days, although Kubota's birthday was coming up, Tomo didn't have money to buy him a gift, so she planned to get a part-time job. However, her idea made Misuzu worried, so she decided to go with Tomo. Even Carol wanted to join. At that moment, Tanabe overheard their conversation, so he invited everyone to work at his place. Tanabe's father owns a ramen shop, and his wife was currently away on vacation, so the shop was short-staffed. Just as Tanabe introduced Tomo's group to the job, his father was overjoyed. In the end, they all put on the shop's uniforms. Everyone got ready to work. It was opening time. Misuzu greeted customers enthusiastically. As for Carol, she didn't know what to do, so she went outside to greet people. Just then, Kubota showed up, unexpectedly. He was a regular at the shop, which left Tomo extremely flustered. A while later, she brought the food over to Kubota. Suddenly, Tomo grew curious about how he felt seeing her in a uniform like this. However, Kubota thought it wasn't bad, which made Tomo blush immediately. She didn't quite understand what that comment meant. After Kubota finished eating, he told Tomo that he would come here to eat every day. At that moment, Tomo felt incredibly happy inside. 3 days later, it was the first time they received their salaries. The amount exceeded everyone's expectations, because Tanabe's father added a bit extra, since he saw how hard they had worked. Outside, Kubota waited for Tomo to go home together. At that moment, Tomo thought he must have a lot of free time, since Kubota always came to the shop during their break. Unexpectedly, the reason was because of Tomo. Although Kubota had eaten there many times, he felt the food tasted even better when it was served by Tomo. This time, Tomo sincerely thanked him. After many days, Kubota was happy to receive a birthday present from Tomo. Coincidentally, Tomo had a similar watch too. However, for Kubota, it didn't matter. On the contrary, he was even happier to match with Tomo. In class, Tomo asked Misuzu for help on how to make Kubota see her as a girl. At that moment, Misuzu came up with a plan. She would find a way for Tomo to have physical contact with Kubota. Just as planned, when Kubota was standing on the stairs, Misuzu tried to push him over. Unexpectedly, the result was not what Misuzu had hoped for. In the end, Tomo gave Kubota a solid beating. A while later, Misuzu thought she had gone too far with that plan. Suddenly, Misuzu slipped and fell onto Tanabe. At that moment, Tanabe felt lucky because he got the chance to have contact with Misuzu. Afterwards, Tanabe was surprised by Misuzu's concern, which made him incredibly happy. Back in the classroom, Misuzu realized something. All this time, she had been making all kinds of plans with the goal of bringing Tomo and Kubota together. However, maybe she had misunderstood it all. The next day, Misuzu didn't show up to class. This made Tomo worried. However, Carol received a message from Misuzu. Today, she is resting at home to recover from her illness. At that moment, the class president made an announcement. The whole class will perform a Cinderella play. They will work together to prepare for the upcoming cultural festival. 3 days later, Tomo went to Misuzu's house to visit her. However, Misuzu seemed a bit uncomfortable. At that moment, Tomo spoke frankly to Misuzu. According to her observation, it seems Misuzu sees Carol as her only friend. That made Tomo feel jealous. Tomo was also curious about why Misuzu kept avoiding her. However, Misuzu didn't want to answer, so she pretended to be tired. The next day, Misuzu suddenly came to class. Misuzu didn't know the reason why, but she was chosen to play Cinderella. Unexpectedly, it was Carol who suggested it to the teacher. That made Misuzu furious. After a while, everyone couldn't rehearse together, so Misuzu and Tomo went up to the rooftop to practice separately. Tomo was anxious, because this time, her role was a prince. Tomo was afraid that after seeing her performance, no one would see her as a girl anymore. However, it was actually Misuzu who cast that curse. So now, she was determined to break it. Back in class, everyone was surprised by Tomo's character appearance. However, she felt a little shy. As for Misuzu, she truly looked like a princess. That left Tanabe speechless outside the room. Finally, everything was ready. Now everyone was just waiting for the festival to begin. The students' parents had arrived. They were looking forward to watching their children perform. Misuzu was the first to go on stage. She began with her own acting skills. A moment later, it was Tomo's turn. She excited the whole audience with that appearance. In the end, everyone had a successful performance. After that, Kubota and Tomo experienced the festival together. At that moment, Tomo realized she truly felt happy spending time with Kubota. When it came time for the dance, Kubota suddenly showed up and invited Tomo to join. Tomo didn't expect to be invited to dance by Kubota. She was afraid people might misunderstand. Suddenly, Kubota assured her, "There's nothing to be misunderstood." That made Tomo embarrassed and walk away. Ever since the festival night, Tomo had been acting strangely. She got scared whenever Kubota mentioned that night. So Tomo would rush to school. Masaki ran into Kubota on the way to school. So the two had a conversation. Kubota admitted that he liked Tomo, but he didn't know what to do. So he asked Masaki for help. For Masaki, the best way was to be honest with Tomo. So Kubota sincerely thanked Masaki. Actually, even Misaki wasn't good at giving love advice either. He was able to date Carol because he also got help from others. Confessing feelings is never easy. At that moment, Masaki encouraged Kubota enthusiastically. A while later, Kubota talked to Misuzu. He told her he was in love with Tomo. Suddenly, Kubota apologized to Misuzu, because ever since he started dating, maybe even before that, Kubota had always secretly liked Tomo. So he felt selfish for doing that to Misuzu. At that moment, Misuzu realized that was the reason why Kubota couldn't make a move on Tomo. This time, Misuzu admitted everything was because of her, so she would take full responsibility. That's why it's best for Kubota to forget about it. Kubota was surprised, because Misuzu was actually very good at caring for others. Kubota sincerely thanked her for everything. A while later, Kubota successfully tricked Tomo into going to the rooftop. At that moment, Kubota opened up honestly. He remembered what Tomo had said. When the two of them stood under the cherry blossom tree, Tomo had said that she loved Kubota. Kubota realized that it wasn't just a friendly confession. At that moment, Tomo got angry, because she knew Kubota had understood it was a love confession. But he pretended not to know. And that had hurt her. After Tomo hit him, no matter how things turned out, Kubota still confessed that he loved Tomo. However, she ran away. It turned out that Tomo had always been afraid. She was scared of ruining everything. This time, Misuzu wanted Tomo to listen to the words she was about to say. Misuzu apologized for what had happened between Tomo and Kubota. Tomo shouldn't force herself to become more feminine. She's perfectly fine being who she is. Suddenly, Misuzu burst into tears. At that moment, she encouraged Tomo to take action. Tomo should bravely go to Kubota, and the two of them would clear everything up. Misuzu felt happy when she saw their story getting a happy ending. Kubota was on his way home when he realized Tomo was behind him. Tomo bravely asked Kubota for another chance. The two of them cleared everything up together. Tomo was happy to know that Kubota truly loved her. They successfully confessed their feelings to each other. And in that moment, they were both truly happy. Many days later, they made a date to go watch a movie together. Tomo followed the plans Misuzu had made earlier. However, the scenes in the movie Tomo was watching made her feel flustered and unable to do anything. Suddenly, Kubota was extremely focused. It turned out he had never learned about love before. So Kubota was doing his best to understand it. But for some reason now, everything felt easier than he expected. Kubota thought, it must be because he already had Tomo in his heart. That made Tomo blush with embarrassment. Just then, Kubota gave her a Christmas gift. And Tomo did the same. The two of them happily strolled through the streets together. Suddenly, Tomo wanted to go to Kubota's house. But the atmosphere between them suddenly turned silent. Tomo got frustrated because she didn't know what to do. She suddenly said she wanted to kiss Kubota. That made Kubota flustered. The mood between them instantly became chaotic. Tomo got angry when Kubota said that they weren't really dating yet. It turned out, after Kubota confessed his feelings to Tomo, he had gone to her house to ask for her parents' permission. But only Akemi gave her full support. As for Aizawa, he said that if Kubota wanted to date Tomo, then he would have to defeat Aizawa. At that moment, Akemi was asking the reason at home. Suddenly, Tomo stormed in. She was furious about her father's actions. Tomo declared that she hated Aizawa. Days passed by, and Tomo still didn't want to see anyone. That made Aizawa feel sad. When she returned to school, Tomo was still angry with Kubota because he hadn't told her about it from the beginning. However, Kubota had his own reasons, so he chose not to tell Tomo the truth. In the classroom, Carol and Misuzu teamed up to threaten Tomo for abandoning them throughout the winter break. So Tomo explained the current situation to them. Finally, it was time for Kubota to challenge Aizawa. He suddenly attacked from behind, catching Aizawa off guard. From now on, Kubota would use everything he had to win. So Akemi also showed up there, which made Aizawa even more confused. Meanwhile, Tomo was at the clubroom. She was worried about Kubota and the situation he was facing. Even Masaki found out about this. He could feel Kubota's determination. At that moment, Tomo asked Masaki for permission to leave early. Back to the ongoing match. Kubota was giving it his all, but Aizawa's strength was overwhelming, which made things difficult for Kubota. Right then, Tomo appeared beside Kubota, leaving him stunned. Tomo was encouraging Kubota. She believed he could definitely do it. Then Tomo pointed out several openings in Aizawa's stance. After observing carefully earlier, Kubota took this opportunity. He successfully landed a hit on Aizawa. In the end, according to Aizawa's own words, Kubota had won the match. So Tomo immediately wanted to start dating Kubota. However, Kubota beat her to it. He confessed to Tomo once again. And that was when the two shared their first kiss. At last, they truly found happiness with each other. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support Oni-chan in future videos. Thank you for watching.